Good afternoon and welcome to the Newark Public Library's Black History Celebration. Today's program is Flaming: Gender Roles, Pop Culture, and Sacred Music in the Black Church. My name is Reggie Blanding and I'm a librarian at the James Brown African American Room of the Newark Public Library in Newark, New Jersey. On behalf of our director, Jocelyn Bowling Dixon, and Board of Trustees President, Dr. Lauren Wells, we thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I would like to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Lenape First Nations on which we are learning, laboring, and organizing today. We also recognize the devastation and the continued legacy of the transatlantic slave trade, which contributed to present-day systemic racism and oppression. Our space at the library, the James Brown African American Room, was named in honor of the late James Library Brown, a librarian, poet, activist, and influencer who was instrumental in making sure that the library sought and maintained books and resources and presented programs examining and celebrating the African American experience. Mr. Brown was especially committed to urging Newark youth to pursue education and to understand the importance of the library's role in their academic growth. This year, our exhibit, Black Power, 19th Century, Newark's First African-American Rebellion, and related programs reflect the research, artistry, and vision of our colleague, Noelle Lorraine Williams. Black Power is one of the most controversial terms of the 20th century. Newark's 1960s Black Power movement and the 1967 rebellion dominate discussions about African-American activism in Newark, and for good reason. It was a piercing, hot wake-up call against the racism and violence that stalked Black lives. However, many of the powerful ideals about saving Black lives that are evident in Black liberation struggles in the 1960s were also evidenced and shaped by those in the 1800s. So we ask you to please visit the virtual exhibit, Black Power. You can do so by going to the library's homepage, which is www.npl.org, which will give you information about all of our Black History Celebration events and the Black Power exhibit, including a website that goes more in depth as well on the history. So you can view our programs also that you may have missed at Newark Public Library's YouTube page. So now I would like to bring on my colleague, the awesome Dale Colston from the James Brown African American Room. So
thank you, Reggie, thank you. And thank you to our panelists and everyone joining us this afternoon. We know how busy February is. We know how busy Saturdays are. And for our panelists, we know that you're in high demand in February, and we absolutely, truly appreciate you spending the afternoon, part of your afternoon with us. As Reggie said, this program is being recorded and will be available for review on the library's YouTube page probably next week. And while some of the questions will be directed to one panelist initially, you're all encouraged to speak freely. So we thank you in advance. Reverend Alicia Lola Jones, PhD, is an assistant professor in the Department of Folklore and Ethnomusicology at Indiana University in Bloomington. She is a graduate of University of Chicago, Yale Divinity School, Yale Institute of Sacred Music, and Oberlin Conservatory. Dr. Jones is a council member of the Society for Ethnomusicology's Council and the co-chair of the Music and Religion section of the American Academy of Religion. Dr. Jones' book, Flaming: The Peculiar Theopolitics of Fire and Desire in Black Male Gospel Performance, breaks ground by analyzing the role of gospel music making in constructing and renegotiating gender identity among Black men. And we shamelessly titled this program after her book. So thank you, Dr. Jones, for that. A fourth generation ordained itinerant preacher, Reverend Dr. Jones has spoken alongside notables such as Professor Sonia Sanchez, Dr. Dorothy Height, Judith Jameson, and attorney Star Jones. Welcome, Dr. Jones. Reverend, oh, thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you. Reverend A. Craig Dunn was born and raised in Montclair, New Jersey, and attended the Montclair Public Schools. He attended Villanova University and later transferred to The Ohio State University, graduating with a Bachelor's of Arts degree in communication in 1983. Reverend Dunn is currently a doctoral candidate at Drew Theological Seminary in Madison, where he also received 2 masters, a Master of Divinity and a Master of Sacred Theology. A former NFL fullback, Reverend Dunn is an adjunct professor of philosophy and religion at Pillar College in Newark, New Jersey. Reverend Dunn, with over 30 years in the ministry, currently serves as senior pastor of the First Baptist Church of Madison, New Jersey. Welcome, Reverend Dunn. Thank you. Brought up in and raised well by his mother in the projects of Washington, D.C., Reverend Kevin E. Taylor is a noted author and writer and producer for television with over 20 years of experience. He is a lecturer and empowerment speaker who has spoken at colleges, universities, and community groups. And he has also been conducting a series of workshops on everything from pitching a TV show idea to uncluttering your life. During his tenure at the BET Network, Reverend Taylor interviewed such icons as Tina Turner, Maxwell, Stevie Wonder, Luther Vandross, Sade, Diana Ross, Lenny Kravitz, Patti LaBelle, and created such shows as Access Granted, Testimony, Lyrically Speaking, and Notarized, which gave the network its highest day ratings in its history. He's a pastor at Unity Fellowship Church in both Newark and New Brunswick. Please join me in welcoming Reverend Jones, Reverend Dunn, and Reverend Taylor. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you. Okay, we have a lot to get to in this hour, so we're just going to jump right in and begin. One of the first known Black churches in America, the African Baptist Church in Mecklenburg, Virginia, was created before the American Revolution around 1798. So that's well over 250 years ago. So that is a Black church, but we'll begin with you, Reverend Jones. What is the Black church?
Thank you so much, Ms. Costa, for the invitation and for the lovely hospitality that you and your staff have shown. The Black church, that question is a very important question, which gets to the idea of how the Black church that we put in quotation marks has often been imagined as a monolith. But really, the Black church is a vernacular or popular term referring to trans-congregational networks, interdenominational networks, or trans-denominational networks, or even multi-faith networks of believing people. Often the Black church may comprise people who were trained in the culture of the Black church through public arts education, or they might also be people who actually worship in these churches. But historically, the Black church has been a site for civic engagement, organizing, worshiping, public arts education, and good food. So it's the clearinghouse, in short, it's the clearinghouse.
Reverend Taylor, Reverend Dunn, anything to add to that, or would that pretty much capture?
I mean, I think the collective energy of that statement would be so true. It's the spiritual and thankfully ever expanding consciousness of the Black community, sometimes housed in a building.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, it's coming out of the building since pandemic now, so.
That's what I say. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Okay. Sister Rosetta Tharpe and Thomas Dorsey both had success in secular music and gospel, yet Sister Rosetta Tharpe perhaps was not given her flowers as a true gospel legend while she was here. She faced criticism for putting too much motion and emotion into her singing, whereas Thomas Dorsey was known as Georgia Tom on the blues circuit, but he later became the father of gospel. Please talk a bit about the Black church and how society responds to women and men in gospel differently then and now. And that's open to anyone. Thank you.
those two in particular represent such a juxtaposition, such a dichotomy, because I mean, you know, Thomas Dorsey is Precious Lord and sitting on the bench and, you know, patting foot and the kind of collective congregational songs that people were differently able to grab hold to, where Rosetta Tharpe, Sister Queen Rosetta Tharpe, had the unmitigated audacity to take the stage and stomp it down. That was, you know, when we were long struggling in respectability politics, she was singing a very non-respectable music before crowds. I just saw pictures of her in the Black Church documentary, and the crowd she was performing for was young and white, and so that represented the aggression of rock and roll that was taking over at the time, and that scared people. That scared a whole lot of people, that she wouldn't stay over here in this quiet little space, but rather went over to this very loud and boisterous one to do what she did. And, you know, she might not have gotten her due at the time, but rock and roll and gospel must speak her name when they are spoken.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. How does society respond to men and women in gospel today? Is it still different, or is it evening itself out?
Well, I love, as Reverend Taylor mentioned, this juxtaposition, especially as we talk about artists like Kirk Franklin and those who are, since Kirk Franklin, showing us the erasure of boundaries between Saturday night and Sunday morning. We get through Sister Rosetta Tharpe and Professor Thomas Dorsey a genealogy of the ways in which, from the beginning of gospel music, and we can go back to Tinley, we can go to Lucy Campbell, but since the beginnings of gospel music, there has never been a tidy boundary between the religious and non-religious. And so today, when we fast forward through that genealogy, what I see is a sort of forgetfulness, a sort of historical forgetfulness, or just not telling the story with all of its details, maybe even sanitized to keep the sort of holiness or respectability going. But from the beginning, gospel music was made from the erasure of boundaries between Saturday night and Sunday morning. And I'm seeing people have, I love to show examples in the classroom of how people like PJ Morton, who is a preacher's kid, father, founded a full gospel organization, how he can take a song like Cheers, Sometimes You Wanna Go, and play in a club, but do it in a way with the chord progressions and articulation that is churchy, and everybody goes in soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. And they luxuriate in the nostalgia, the churchy nostalgia. And he uses his music minister roots in order to bring the gospel to the streets. I love those examples. And it's always been that way. Always.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was just watching PJ Morton do with an orchestra somewhere like in Colorado, and he did his song Everything. And, you know, and it's just kind of almost a Pharrell Williams happy at the beginning. Everything's gonna be all right. And by the time he finishes, they have gone to full Holy Ghost gospel church. And those same people who were just kind of snapping are now up and hands up in worship. And that's always been the way. You know, I remember the time one of the members of Sweet Honey in the Rock walked us through the powerful transition of music to hear that, oh, Danny boy, the pipes are calling. It's amazing grace, shall always be my song. It's like, it was always this kind of nudging so that it felt familiar, so that you gave yourself permission to surrender to it, and then pow, it got you.
Actually, that song Danny Boy is foundational to a lot of the Divine Nine hymns.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you. And in that same vein, I did have a question here about Kanye West and Sunday service. Just as Dr. Jones has said that the theme song from popular television series Cheers was then kind of reworked. So he sampled Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit and Come As You Are. He's reworked Genuine's So Anxious to become My Soul's Anchored. And even Rufus and Shaka Khan's Sweet Thing, he has kind of reworked that as well. And for those unfamiliar, Nirvana was an integral part of the blueprint of that Seattle grunge alternative rock coming out of out west in the 1980s. And Genuine is an R&B sex symbol and dancer. So it was interesting how he went from there to there. But is this merging of R&B, rock, and hip hop the only way to make church a destination for young people?
I think that, so I think that's, I think that is always kind of the elder amongst us thinking that's what brings the young people into the church. But the truth is, when young people see their parents or their grandparents surrender to the music in a way that feels like passion, that feels like exaltation, they are moved by it. For young people, there are young people who only know Aretha Franklin from her 2015 performance of You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman for Carole King at the Kennedy Center Honors. Mm-hmm. And to watch grandmother come out and get to the piano with her fur coat and her purse and be like, oh, she's doing nice. And when that coat came off, they were like, wait a minute, you know what I mean? And the room went up. Those moments when the room goes up always matter. So it's foot stomping, hand clapping. It's the more colloquial stuff. Young people pay attention to passion. And so to this day, when my son and I drive in the car, there's an old song, Jesus Can Work It Out If You Let Him, you know that song? And so that's our joint, right? And then there's a point that and it said, I prayed, Lord, don't let it be too late. And then it goes, too late. When we're driving, we both go, whoa, whoa. It's our thing, you know what I mean? And he learned it when he was 12, right? And now at 31 as a father, if we're in the car and the record comes on, we still lean because it's just, church is infectious. So whatever elements we pull that bring that thing to it, that thing that makes that thing show up. Sometimes the kids don't know that they know it. Hip hop kids didn't know it Smells Like Teen Spirit. They just knew that they knew it. It felt familiar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, church is infectious, Reverend Taylor, is when we stop with the bureaucracy, with the patriarchy, and all those things that the traditionalism that is fearful to the Black male ego. Mm.
Mm-hmm. with you today, sir.
So when you look at those things, is that we think that if we build a bigger mousetrap, that people won't come to it, but young people will come to the church when they see the consistency of people's behavior and life being changed and transformed through love and not law.
Yeah,
good. That's good, doctor. That's good.
And I serve a traditional, predominantly African American church in a predominantly white neighborhood. That is finding its voice now. Transitioning from a history of being domestics to sitting around serving the table, to actually being a church that convenes the table and takes a seat at the table. Yeah. And so when you look at that, I think that's what's bringing young people, because where my church sits, there are 3 colleges. And so prior to the pandemic, we have college students, coming in every Sunday.
Thank you for that. 2 things come to mind. One has to do with in Flaming the book, one of the chapters on Gospel Go-Go, which is the gospelized version of our indigenous music, DC, yes, Southeast. That's
Southeast all day, every day.
So Gospel Go-Go becomes a way in which I talk about this sort of way that, first of all, there are music ministers who are the best music directors for any talent that we, and I'm sure you know this, Reverend Taylor, with what you do, in media. The leading artists in R&B charts, pop charts, like the ones with live bands, have music ministers who are their music directors. I guess my rhetorical question is it that we are bringing rock and gospel, rock and pop into the church, or is the church the training ground, the Public Arts Education Institute that I mentioned, that has this roux that we take into the streets through touring, through the studios? They have the competencies, they understand how to strike a chord and cause us to enter in immediately. They know how to also draw people into the churches. And that's what I found with Gospel Go-Go, that what folks were doing was trying to find the sounds that drew men, the quote unquote unchurched. But really it was a conversation. There is no boundary between the religious and the non-religious. And a lot of these hit makers are music ministers who actually are pretty devoted and consistent and have the discipline to go on the road and deliver every time because of what the Black church gave them.
I have, real quick, I have two, one of my deacon and her sister are our dance ministry in the church, or lead our dance ministry. And they said, they just texted me while I was at breakfast having this conversation. Pastor, we were just talking about how we could throw any song at you and you could take it to the Lord. I was like, well, if you always have the Lord in mind, there was nothing that you can't toss it, you know? And then she was like, so we just decided we should make it a game. I was like, okay, let's go. And they were like, back that thing up. And I was like, no, I preached that before. Try something else. And they were like, Trey Songz, Panty Dropper. Bet you can't do nothing with that. And I was like, oh, watch it. I said, you know. And so we talked about God being a heart fixer, mind regulator, a joy restorer. And if he has to, God will be a panty dropper and expose all your pain and hurt and bring you back to righteous consciousness, whatever it takes. Because somebody's heart got broken, but somebody's break didn't happen there. So thank God I serve a panty dropper, a pain stopper. They were like, come on. I was like,
I want to say something like, the window to the wall.
right. I mean, if you're always listening for God, you can always, in all ways.
True.
If the word said in everything, give thanks. What?
That is true.
Yeah, I definitely have to say, as far as researching Newark in the early 19th century, I was kind of afraid. I was like, how exactly did most of these folks who are connected to these Presbyterian churches and early kind of Anglican style churches, how were they expressing, you know, in as far as their music? What was the passion in their music? And it was interesting because I found this document that was commemorating the anniversary of Newark's second Black church, which was created in 1835. And actually, all the folks left the segregation of Old First Church on Broad Street. As you guys probably know, during the early 19th century, a lot of African Americans couldn't they had to either sit in a segregated section in the church, or as we had in Newark at Old First Church, which still exists here in Broad Street, they actually had to stand by the windows the whole service, even though they were paying to be members. But it just warmed my heart when I found this document, you know, commemorating that anniversary. And the woman wrote a song to an Anglican style music where she was reclaiming, she was like, God of our warriors, you know, telling the story of the people standing up and finding this new church. So even though it was, you know, it wasn't what we usually think of as passionate singing, African Americans were still able to put that resistance and that strength and power into our religious music, you know. And it's also very interesting, you know, even with bringing up Sister Thought, it was believed that she was in a relationship with Marie Knight, who was one of her singers during the 1940s. And Marie Knight was from Newark here. And they were believed to have been in a lesbian relationship. So it's very like provocative and just engaging that we brought up Sister Tharp's name and that she might have been in a relationship with Marie Knight. And at the least, she was in a very intimate performing relationship with Marie Knight from Newark, New Jersey. So yeah, I just wanted to share those things. But I had a question for Reverend Taylor.
Well, even in mentioning that, that's still a legitimate narrative. We don't have to have it confirmed that they were in a sexually intimate relationship, because there's so much from friendship to the erotic. There's so much from the homosociality.
Yeah.
Come on, Dr. Jones, come on.
Relationship. I even take up what lesbian writer Susan Cusick puts. And she said, because of the distribution of pleasure through music making, one could argue that being a musician is a form of sexual orientation, especially for what lesbians can tell you about pleasure. So there are many ways that they may not have, they may or may, we don't need to know
Yeah.
they were lovers. How can we confirm it? However, there's so much in between friendship
Yes.
to lovers that's interesting enough, right?
Yes.
How they were able to be there for each other. Even situational sexuality, the intimacy of being on the road and loving the one you're with. I mean, these are very common practices that happen in church leadership, that
Yes.
happen on the road, and that happen in everyday life. I just want to say, we don't have to know.
Sexuality in those relationships.
Yes. Thank you, Reverend Jones.
There's always a way in which we seek to categorize and pigeonhole people into things. And on that point, when you was talking about that particular church, Presbyterian Church, First Church in Newark, my unique experience in the Presbyterian Church was an African Presbyterian church on Grove Street in Newark.
Okay.
And literally, they had congas and drums on one side, and the robes and everything on the other side. And so when they sang on this side, the Presbyterian hymns, they were as white as Presbyterian whiteness could be. Then they shifted literally to the other side of the thing and started singing the African more lively. And they just moved from one side to the other. And I think that's where that balance right now is, that, we try to, sacred and secular, but they both have the same root meaning. So anything can be redeemed through God. So we wrestle with all these definitions in these categories without realizing everything comes from God.
Anything can be redeemed.
There, like that, I'm sorry, I'm like actively thinking about the connections, but like, even when you describe what may seem spatially as a bifurcation of identity, what you're also alerting us to is a northern instance in which we see the remnants of enslavement in our worship, how it was colonized, specifically because of the drum. The drum, only instrument historically in the United States and throughout the diaspora that was prohibited by law to be played, because colonizers, enslavers understood that the drum could be used to communicate. We know of the talking drum, and we also now know of talking instruments. However, they thought that to communicate with the drum or in our own languages other than the drum would mean that we would uprise. And so it was prohibited by law. Vigilantes would kill people over it. Law enforcers would kill people over it. And that trickled into our worship experience that was also surveilled by law by white people. And so you mentioning that as a northern instance, when I say that in seminaries, I hear people in North Carolina say, we still don't go to churches that have a drum. Like, we still don't do it. And we didn't know that this was the legacy, this was the genealogy of it.
Wow.
Tear churches apart here in the North, in New Jersey, it was like, oh, they bought a drum set in. Our church is 125 years old. I've been there 6 years, and we just put a drum set in. 6 years I've been there.
And my church has both traditional, snared cymbal drums and djembe and African drums. And it makes, this conversation makes so much sense simply because I can imagine to those colonizers, those oppressors, those peeking into the woods and into our worship, watching Sister Mayrang who sat like this demurely for most of the time that they knew her, when she worked in the house and saw her in other places. And then this drum pulled this other woman up out of her, and they were like, well, hold up, wait a minute. There is an uprising, and they wanted to think it's going to look like just this, but it told that woman internally that you are more, and the visceral of that must have scared the plantation owner to look in.
Of course.
And I love it.
Yeah, I think Reverend Dunn made he said an important phrase earlier. He said, love and not law, you know? And I think there's something compelling about that, particularly when your livelihood or your life in living fully and freely is actually against the law, as it was in the 1800s. And so how did we as a people construct this space outside of law, right, that was able to affirm our beings as spirits, as human beings, as something bigger than this legal system. And so I really like that you said that, love and not law. It's very powerful.
But we do it every time we gather together as family.
It's funny because the first African-American church in Newark is actually an AME Zion church. And it was founded by Bishop Christopher Rush, for all of you that know him from Manhattan. And in the book, when the AME Zion Church actually discusses establishing this church here in Newark in 1826, they call it the first Black institution. And so one of the things that really has come out in the scholarship is how these churches were they were religious spaces and they were institutions. And particularly the AME Zion Church, as you all know, was called the Freedom Church because of all the work they did around the Underground Railroad. And so many scholars are even, I can't remember her name now, I think she's in Indiana. She's actually saying that if we actually look at the map of where AME Zion churches are, they actually parallel and reflect the Underground Railroad paths in various states, you know? And so it's really fascinating. So Reverend Taylor, I had a question for you. Unity Fellowship Church has a very special relationship to LGBTQI issues and to popular culture. As we know, Unity Fellowship Church Los Angeles was founded in 1982 by Reverend Carl Bean for openly gay and lesbian African Americans. The first meetings were held in the private residence of Reverend Bean on Cochran Avenue in Los Angeles. Prior to that, in 1975, Bean was a Motown and disco singer noted for the liberation song, I Was Born This Way. What is Bishop Bean's influence on you and your work? And in what ways has this dual trajectory, right? A boldness in pop culture and a place of home for LGBTQI folks empower the church's mission. So I wonder if all of our audience, well, our audience today and our audience in the future, because people will continue watching this, has heard the song. And let's actually play a sample from the song. Jonathan? Can we play a sample from the song? Thank you. I think you're muted. You should unmute yourself.
Love me like I love you, and together ain't no telling what to do. Yeah, oh, I will know this way. Proud to tell you, proud to tell you, this way.
Yes.
So, I mean, I think you asked a question that is so wonderfully that so wonderfully speaks to the journey of my life, because there is this, you know, this late 70s disco hit from Archbishop when he was just, you know, when he was a singer and signed to Motown. I want people to sit with that record came out on Motown Records, right?
Yes.
And, you know, for the young queer boy, you know, a whole half a country away is Detroit. I'm originally from Washington, D.C., as we were just talking. I start most of my speeches. I was born a fat black asthmatic gay nerd in the projects of Southwest DC, and I fought about every one of those things every day. Music was sanctuary for me. So before, let me tell this real quick. Before I even discovered this song, because I was a young adult in the clubs by the time I discovered Born This Way. I had already discovered Sylvester. While Sylvester was singing Dance With Me in the Disco Heat, if you ever found the album Living Proof, when they take that song live, they take it to church. I mean, to full on, Sunday, it is Sunday night, y'all. Y'all know, and he goes all the way to church. And, you know, then you read the book and he talks about singing Never Grow Old on an apple box in a Baptist church. And they let him sing it at 6 and 7 and 8 and 9. And then at 10, it was like, hold up now. You got to stop a little bit that sugar in his tank. And so that's the relationship with us in the church. Like, sing as long as you don't get too sweet, as long as it's not too, as long as it's not. But it was even deeper than that, because let me tell this real quick. I was a young boy at 12 when we first went to Tyrone Baptist Church in Southwest DC, and a guest choir came and sang the song, "The Storm Is Passing Over," Encourage My Soul. And that song broke little 12-year-old Kevin open. And I just remember this getting hot and just starting to clap and not feeling my hands anymore. And this usher grabbed me and said, "You stop that. You don't know what you're shouting about." And it just kind of, it was like cold water on my spirit, ice cold water. And for, you know, for the next 2 years, you know, that Baptist church, we go up every other Sunday or every other service, you know? And so I'm sitting there and it never comes back. It never comes back. I felt like I couldn't claim it. And it was Natalie Cole's live album, on which she does a song called Party Lights, which on the original album in 77 was a disco song. I see the party. It's very disco. The cadence of it is very, you know, very hustle. For whatever reason, and we become friends, and I asked her and the musicians, what made you all do it to it what you did on the live album? Because they double it up to almost this gospel house. And then there's a point in the middle where she goes, "You know what to do to get into the groove. You got to get up." That was, honestly, she laid hands on me through the record because it was church, right? And then she goes, "People, everybody, children." And back in the day, I didn't know adults called the queens children. So I'm thinking she's talking to 14-year-old me as a child, coming back to what somebody took from me, right? So my mother, you know, and it took me out. My mother tells the story of coming into the house, and she said, as I was coming in, Miss Susie from across the hall said, "Louise, hurry up in there." Because that boy, she said, that boy going in, and he ain't in by himself.
Yes.
Right? Because me and the Holy Ghost were in the room.
Yes.
So, you know, this journey, this transition, this thing, for many of us LGBT folk, we got God back in the club. The Tremaine Hawkins Fall Down, through the Clark Sisters, You Brought the Sunshine. We got God back. You know, Kenny Bobian from right here in Newark, New Jersey, Blessed and I Shall Not Be Moved. We got God back in the club. If there's a DJ named DJ Cedric that you talked earlier, Dr. Jones, Cedric was a minister of music in the club, and he preached as the DJ booth as a pulpit. And I'm telling you, he could spin for 4 or 5 hours. And I remember being 21, 22, and being on the dance floor for 4 hours, and it was 4 hours of church. It wasn't, you know, a mix of, oh, we're gonna play something. It was all gospel house that I didn't even know existed. And hearing the Lord's name when I was on a night where I'm supposed to be my freest, and we thought we were hiding our deepest, and we surrendered all on the dance floor. I mean, I remember him pulling a trash can out one and 2 sticks, and just it became, that trash can became a djembe. And so, you know, the fullness of this is that Lady Gaga went back and got Born This Way. And you to Archbishop Jones, Archbishop Bean, Senior Bishop Jones, Archbishop Beans, for that work, because 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010, now in the 20s, people still speak that song. We here in Newark are one of the hallmarks of house music. And
Yeah.
you don't do Lincoln Park House Music Festival without Born This Way.
Yeah.
And not a person moves. Not a person moves. They don't go, oh, this song's not about me. Let me get off the floor. They twirl and get it in and go up, because something in the audacity to stand up that bold, that strong, to come out and come all the way out. Anybody, preachers, help me with come all the way out, because that's the truth of helping of helping so many people understand the power of this walk and this work that we have given to the community, to the culture, the capacity to come out of the shame, the stigma, the story of you think you think your siblings, but your mother and son, you think that Uncle so-and-so raped you and nobody wants to talk about it. It has given us the capacity to come out and come all the way out. So I thank God that God met Archbishop Bean in the booth and at the altar.
Yes, yes. And thank you for that. I mean, 2 programs ago, we actually had Kenny Bobian on our program, The Music of Black Power, and he performed I Shall Not Be Moved after our discussion about how spirituals made this connection to pop culture. And even though I'm supposed to ask a question about pop culture now, I just think this is the opportunity. I know at Pastor Taylor's church, they do praise dancing. And I'm not sure if they covered it in Reverend Jones's book, and as well as Pastor Dunn's church. But to me, I just wanted to ask you all about praise dancing. It just seems like when I see women and men and young people engage it at church, I'm not sure what's going on. It's almost like people have this opportunity to present their bodies in such a radical, embodied, spiritual manner. And it's like when I feel, everyone, you feel like, and no matter where the praise dancing is going, whether it's at Reverend Taylor's church and it's a young gay or bisexual man performing it with like a clown with a mime, or I see some young girls in Jersey City doing it, or even the city of Newark had folks performing it on a public channel. There's something about taking your body right from the street or this commodified place to really like reclaiming it. So I really want to hear what you all have to say about that.
Sure. I know my spouse is somewhere like, yes, I'm so going to be able to talk about this. Shout out to Calvin. The last time I was with Reverend Taylor, he was like, why didn't you mention this particular chapter, which is entitled Pole Dancing for Jesus? Mm-hmm. This is where I address liturgical dance by someone who uses pole fitness to worship God. Interesting connecting to Pastor Dunn's comments earlier, because dance is another prohibition that we can trace to the church today, where we get the ring shout. The ring shout was our investment, our ingenuity in response to not being able to dance under the surveillance of white overseers. Fast forward to the late 20th century, 21st century, from the 1970s on. Kathleen Turner has written beautifully about this, the development of liturgical dance, where many women were activated through this. However, men's movement and the extent to which it was hard, quote unquote, or soft, became a site for assessment, became a way that people try to link something about their most vulnerable private actions with their public penetration, if you will, by the Holy Spirit. Through Pole Dancing for Jesus, I want projects related to liturgical dance scholarship, looking at Jungle Cat, who arose to fame in around 2009 with a viral video of him worshiping God on Easter Sunday to the song "I Need You to Survive." It was distributed on Huffington Post, Washington Post, And I engaged what it meant to, first of all, respond using that particular music to his background, as a backdrop, but then also, who do we presume is supposed to be on that pole in lieu of him?
Mm.
Ineligible for being reclaimed for a holy purpose? Is there a precedent? Is there a historical use of poles or pole-like tools in worship? And I have found that there are. There are Judeo-Christian usages. Asherah, the Jewish goddess, was a figurine, a pole that men would actually worship through castration in order to be devotees to this particular deity. Or circus arts, men use poles in that. South Asian gymnastics of Malakam, it's another way that men are expected to be on the pole. But when Jungle Cat started doing his praise pole dance, as he refers to it, folks described him as blasphemous. And I share in the story that in many ways he had never seen pole dancing before. He didn't know what it was. He was from North Carolina and had moved to DC, saw an infomercial and was inspired to purchase an indoor pole, and the rest is history.
Wow.
But through it, I'm able to talk about homoerotics. I'm able to talk about what we presume to be a phallic symbol is actually understood elsewhere as a nurturing symbol. Symbolism, how the symbolism unchecked can get in the way of us being in community with a person, and then that person also being able to do it how they feel it. Like he missed home and wanted to show his mom what he had been learning for the last year. So he uploaded it, and it took off. So check that out, Pole Dancing for Jesus.
Wow, thank you for that. Are there any other comments about praise dancing?
I think praise dancing in our church has been a way in which our young people have come to the church, both straight and gay and welcoming, right? And it's a way in which we don't see the body as an instrument, and so again, it's like we're tight with that, right? And so how do we free people up in that? So it's about being able to fully express yourself, as God is showing. I think that we don't do that enough. One time I was at a wedding, and it's funny, when the pastor stepped out of the reception, everybody was on the dance floor. When he came back in, everybody sat back down. And I thought that was the most hypocritical moment I've experienced in my life. Dale will tell you, we, in my family, we just get live. We're just, we're not pretentious, and all that stuff. We have Southern folks, West Indian folks. I'm a mixture of both, and we have everybody in the family. So the church should represent that, I believe, and that's what I think that when we try to monitor or stifle people's terms of expression, everything is an offering unto God, right? That's what I believe.
Reverend Dunn, you talked about this conversation that a lot of people haven't had about why are millennials leaving the church, and they think it's because they're distracted by their phones or because of that, and it really has to do with hypocrisy. They can see the pastor over here preaching holiness of hell, and then in your account over here you hand dancing, and you cut them up for doing this, and it's like, let yourself be a whole human being. I thank God for what you just said, Reverend Dunn, because I used to almost not go to receptions. I was like, because y'all don't want to act up in front of your pastor. They'll be like, Pastor, we know you get it in. So now, not only do they come, they play my song, Didn't I Bring You Up? Look.
Yeah.
When that song goes bad, but the whole room like, oh, and you can see me if I'm in the bathroom, I'm coming out with a towel. Get it? I was like, we did not come to this reception to sit still, and so they know. If pastor act up, the whole room will, because that is what like you said, the whole idea that liturgical dance was a number of young people's invitation into the church and to the altar. My son, did a liturgical dance, a mime dance for every mountain when he was 17, trying to reclaim his faith and his space of honor after he had a child at 17. So to see him do for every mountain at service and surrendering in a way that tore the place up, and to be alive long enough for him to do the same dance with his 13-year-old daughter.
Wow.
Right. And then you look at and even along that point, right, is that how often has the church shamed, someone? So what we did in our church, one of the young ladies in my church got pregnant and she wanted to do a gender reveal in the congregation. I said, no, we're not going to do that. What we did do was I had her come before the congregation and had all the women come and lay hands on her. And I had another woman who was a single mom pray for her. And when it was asked why I did that, I said, because in this congregation, how many of these women were shunned by the church for being unwed moms? And so the church has to be this place of reconciliation, right? We have this ministry of reconciliation and healing, right? And healing, where there is no shame, there's no guilt. And like I keep saying that love transcends law, because law is for bureaucracy, right? You got to do it this way. But love says, I accept you as you are, express yourself.
Yes.
Do you, all the other spots are taken.
It's so fascinating you bringing up that example of the sister being blessed, because one of the things as I was doing my research here in Newark, as well as Philadelphia, was seeing this number of African-American enslaved women who were named Hagar, and that, in the beginning, I had to go back and I had to check the text, is this what I'm thinking? Is this correct? And then to see kind of like these white male leaders here in Newark, Philadelphia, Boston, naming their enslaved women Hagar. And I said, what kind of reality must that must have been to name an enslaved woman using this religious theme around servitude, rape, slavery, and engendering it within the culture, And so
who do you think started the story that Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings were lovers?
Yeah.
Well, he had such an affinity for her that they must have been, no. That man had an affinity for Patsy in 12 Years a Slave, and beat her because he couldn't stop raping her.
Yeah.
Well, he must have put some sort of jungle woman something on him. Because otherwise he would have been a stalwart Christian man who was faithful to his wife. It's that wicked womanness, that black, listen, Hagar, it makes sense because they've been the same yesterday, today, and forevermore.
Yes.
In the movie Harlem Nights, they call it Sunshine.
Yeah. And so just to see those layers, and then just to see the way that women and LGBT folks have stepped into these spaces to reclaim their wholeness, right? And I think a lot of that's what we're speaking about as far as these performance spaces, music spaces, everything, is how do we as African-American LGBT folks, heterosexual folks, cisgender, trans folks, how do we become whole in this thing we call life, And there's this way that culture gives us this concept of Black power, of Black empowerment.
Yeah, but one of the things you talk about in terms of LGBTQI and women being whole is don't overlook the fact that a lot of African American males are struggling with their wholeness as well. And that's why the issues crept up in the church, because how are they affirmed as being a person if we were beat down all week long, so that way. So in the South, where my dad was from, if everybody worked in the fields, then the only time you had status and position was in the church or the Masonic Lodge.
Yep.
You was worshipful master or something in the Masonic Lodge. So that differentiated you from everybody else in the fields. You bring that mentality to the church. And so it's like, I'm in charge and I can't have anybody take my charge. So I can't have this woman take my charge. I can't have this because I'm nobody anywhere else. How do we how do we begin to affirm everyone's humanity and personhood?
Yes.
You know, without demonizing one or the other, because even that male pastor who has an issue with a woman in ministry is coming from a place of pain and lack of understanding. You know, there are places in New Jersey where women are still not allowed in the pulpit. The further south you go in New Jersey, like Camden area and all that's still an issue.
Oh, wow.
I sit on the committee with American Baptist Church in New Jersey, an ordination committee, and you hear these women tell these stories about, I'm like, are we in 2021? I mean, I just heard this Thursday.
Wow.
Reverend Dunn, we have here in Newark an Office of Clergy Affairs at the Ministerial Alliance. There's some 700 houses of worship just here in Newark alone. And when I was co-pastoring with Elder Janice Jackson Jones, who is now in North Carolina, she would, she does the meetings. We were trying to divide the stuff, but she likes me. I don't like meetings. So somebody starts to say, let me echo or piggyback, I get irritated and might say so. So she did the meetings. And so she asked me to join her in the meeting once, and she just was really insistent about it. And as we go into the meeting, they're talking. One of the men in leadership says, "Oh, and Bishop so-and-so, Elder so-and-so, sister," and then somebody else says, "Sister, sister, Bishop, Elder, Apostle, sister." And I was like, "Hold up, wait a minute." And so it was very interesting to me that my gay male presence had no pertinence. Big, black, deep-voiced man. And so, hold up, brothers. Hold up. It's either going to be brother, sister, or it's going to be elder, bishop, apostle, because this woman has worked too hard and served too well to walk through the doors where she's supposed to be the safest and get titularly raped by you all taking her title because you want to reduce her to something else. Oh, brother, good Lord, we didn't mean that. So I'm brother, she's sister. So brother. So we've decided in this room we brother and sister. That's it. Somebody else throw a title around. We're gonna have an offering jar. You're gonna have to put $20 in it for our resources, because we gotta either let these titles go when we come in these rooms or honor them. You can't do both. You can't bastardize the sisters while you are masturbating under your own title. Right? So the struggle of this is just so much of what you said, Rev Dunn, because in so many ways, we have to honor and own the ways that church, the Black church, as you started this conversation, was the institution where we reclaim something. And sometimes that reclamation looked like respectability politics. You can't come here, you don't belong here. It looked like the overseer. And so preachers wouldn't let a woman in the pulpit because she could out-preach him. They didn't want the queen taking the mic because his anointing might break all the yokes he couldn't under the word. And so it became this, it becomes still sometimes. And so I've gone in many pulpit as a Black gay man who's out in media as gay and had a preacher say, because like the mother he's eulogizing today is the mother of a daughter who is one of my trustees. So they go, "All right, Pastor, I want you to, you get 5 minutes to bring a word," right? And he'll brush past, "You got 5 minutes." I walk back past him in 4.5, church on fire. You got to come, you got to come back for revival. How you do that? The anointing. I don't know what you think we're gonna do. I don't know what you think, Queens. I don't know who you think who wrote all these songs. I don't know how as Pastor Dewey, reprimanded the church on that. You want to get rid of them, but you won't stop singing their songs. I don't know what God you think we serve, but we must know God really well to still call on the name of the Lord after all y'all have done to us, and we still know the Lord. Yeah, that's how good God is.
Yes.
The same thing pops up in music ministry in the sense of even other discrete ways, like who we refer to as a musician. So instrumentalists are musicians, but singers are singers, which may not seem like much, but when we talk about who is likely to be compensated,
It is.
the musicians or the instrumentalists are the ones that are understood to be worthy of compensation. The singers are not, but the singers are typically today women and gay, queer people. And they are less likely to be in some sort of a stable role within the church, a decision-making role. And so in a similar way, when I'm talking to music ministers and workshopping them, I give them new language, or I remind them of language. Vocalists have embodied instrumentation. They are also musicians, and they are lightweight theologians, because if they don't have a word and if they're not relevant for the service and the mood, y'all will X them out anyway. These are not the same requirements that we have for instrumentalists. And so as we're thinking about duties and functions and compensation, this is how we build that case in solidarity with one another in even those aspects of worship.
But even in the context of ministry, though, you have a lot of times where the ministers of music or musicians or instrumentalists, as you say, are more compensated than clergy.
Yes.
Rare, though.
Say it again?
It's rare, but
Not in New Jersey.
Not in New Jersey.
listen, let's talk about the national average, Jesus.
Right.
We're coming up on 3 o'clock, but I did want to talk, if we can, if there's such a thing as a short answer about the Black liberation theology. Let me just quickly about that. The late Reverend James H. Cone explained that at the core of Black liberation theology is an effort in a white-dominated society in which Black has been defined as evil, to make gospel relevant to the lives and struggles of Black Americans, and to help Black people to learn to love themselves. It's an attempt, he said, to teach people how to be unapologetically Black and Christian at the same time. How can today's Black church continue to embrace Black liberation theology? And what does that look like? If we can have a couple of short answers, then Noel's gonna wrap. Thank you.
So for me, Unity Fellowship Church movement, we have often declared in exaltation, Mother, Father, God, or Mother, Father, everything, God. And it becomes a part of the ritual, the ritualistic way in which we pray. And so it has been very interesting to do that in other houses of worship and have the pastor say to me, like, he doesn't even have an issue with like the LGBT part. It's this Mother God thing that you're talking, that I need to meet with you about, because it's uncommon. And so it's being strong and consistent in it, and being, unapologetically relentless, because, the same ways that we have been able to blend and bleed other things into the church house, we also have to do it into the word, inject it with this next level of connectedness to the Spirit God that has no gender. We have to, we have to keep pouring that into us, because it's playing into patriarchy of God is the head of the church, and so I get to be head of this church. Because I'm a man.
I would just add, one of the tenets of liberation theology is, as we advocate for ourselves and consider allyship, that we must also think about who is displaced by our emergence. And that really is a part of the ethic of why I wrote Flaming, because I really wanted to take seriously the idea of being known by our love. And as a Black woman who has experienced the indignity as a competent, anointed, God-loving woman being pushed to the side for guys that ain't spent any other time with Jesus than in the time we spend in the sanctuary for that engagement. As a woman who has experienced misogynoir, I couldn't help but feel empathy for men who say that they have experienced the same sort of misogynoir within the church because of feminine masculinity and gender expressions. And as I explore that, it really, I hope, as you said, calibrated my posture while doing the research. Just really thinking about, how would I want someone to handle this topic in alliance with me? And so that really has been a guiding principle for how I've approached the research.
Thank you.
I mean, the whole thing about it too is that God is on the side of the oppressed. So liberation, a church without liberation theology is not a Christian church. And so the black church has been the voice of liberation since its inception from the shores of Africa to today. And a church that doesn't have liberation at its core is not a church of Christ.
You better say that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for your comments. And thank you, Reverend Jones, Reverend Dunn, and Reverend Taylor. It's from the bottom of my heart, and on behalf of the Newark Public Library, I want to express our gratitude for engaging in conversation with us here today, for the art and beauty of Black Power, cinema, dance, and music. And I would like to give an immense shout out in expression of gratitude to PMC Foundation for continuing to support the Newark Public Library, as well as other radical and innovative African-American history programming around the country, even including the African-American History Museum in Washington, DC. Thank you for your continued support. As well as the New Jersey Historical Commission, which has funded our exhibition, Black Power, 19th Century, Newark's First African-American Rebellion. I would encourage everyone to please visit the website to view the virtual exhibition. It is multimedia. It features videos, including one about an enslaved woman in a jail here in Newark on Broad Street, expressing herself through song, as well as some of the pastors who were Black abolitionists from that period. Jonathan, if you could please show the flyer for next week. So please join us next week for our final panel, Free Black Communities, the Underground Railroad and Slavery, Telling and Researching the Stories. Again, as with the other 4 programs we have, we're featuring folks who are either doing the work here in Newark or doing the work nationally, and rethinking how we conceive of Black power. When we think of Black power, we're thinking of Black empowerment, Black liberation through culture. And so this workshop will feature scholars, active grassroots activists, community members who are working to promote these stories here in New Jersey, including the Lost Souls Memorial, which will be a memorial in East Brunswick that will commemorate enslaved people in New Jersey who were free and sent to Louisiana in the 19th century. So please visit us there. Please come to that next week. And please be sure to bookmark npl.org/BHC 2021. There you'll find links to our past programs, including the one with Secretary Lonnie Bunch and dancer Savion Glover. And then this week we will also upload this program, and you'll find all the information to share with people and to refresh and feed yourself. So again, thank you and have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
God bless you.
Bless you all. Bless you all.
Bless
Thank you, Jonathan.
Boom!